Hey, what's up, guys? Aloha Football Talk here. After talking about the most improved position groups in the NFL already last week, I wanted to look at one unit in particular with the offensive line and list my top 10 O-lines heading into 2020. To do so, I tried to look at these offensive lines in a vacuum, kind of how well do they execute certain run schemes, how diverse can they be, or how great are they with the bread and butter, and of course, how well do they protect the quarterback. While I want to support my case with certain statistics and advanced numbers in particular, solely going by the stats would be a huge mistake, since that for last season would mean the Rams had one of the best pass blocking O-lines because they allowed the fewest amount of sacks, and then the Giants, they would be a top 5 run blocking unit, even though Saquon Barkley routinely had to make people miss in the backfield, and you had Daniel Jones popping up the average with his 6 yards a carry. That certainly helped. So instead, the way I wanted to do this is look at the starting 5 individually, then talk about some of the strengths they have, what do they run well, some of the things they may struggle with a little bit. I kind of had to project the starting lineups a little bit here with some teams, and there will be some battles for specific spots depending on how much of a training camp we will maybe have. That's why I mentioned key backups here as well, since they could potentially be starters in 2020. And under the new CBA, teams are now allowed to dress at least 2 more players on game days, plus another one if the active roster includes at least 8 offensive linemen. So the strategy some of these teams are going to choose will be interesting to me, and I would expect a lot more teams carrying 8 linemen on Sundays. And just to make this clear, this is a projection of what I think will be the top 10 O-lines in 2020, even though I reference a lot what happened last season and beyond that. Just to avoid any confusion, it's not a ranking of what they did already, but rather what I project them to be in 2020. And as number 1, as you can already tell, I have the Indianapolis Colts. Not only do I believe that the Colts have the best offensive lineman in football today in Quentin Nelson, but I also believe they are the most well-rounded unit with no real weaknesses in their game. That is largely due to the investments they have made to improve that unit. You have 3 first round on the left side, and then their right tackle, he was an early second round as well. The one spot that people might not be completely sold on is right guard with Mark Lewinsky. He entered last season as a week 1 starter for only the second time in his career, but in the 25 games he has started now for Indianapolis, he's been responsible for just 2 sacks and was called for holding twice in each of the last 2 seasons, so he's been playing very well. And then you have left tackle Anthony Costanzo. He's only given up 4.5 sacks and was called for holding once over the last 2 years combined. One of the more underappreciated players at the position for a while now, in my opinion. On the opposite end, Braden Smith, excellent for his first 2 years in the league, one of the more aggressive run blockers out there, but also held his own against some of the elite edge rushers in the AFC South, such as J.J. Watt, now the emerging Harold Landry in Tennessee, and all those guys they have had in Jacksonville. We move to the middle with center Ryan Kelly. He's never allowed multiple sacks in his 4 years in the league. He has the ability to down block, reach, or pull on the run game. And then there's Big Q at that left guard spot, who was a generational prospect to me, coming out 2 years out of Notre Dame. I don't really have to say a lot with him. The numbers and awards speak for themselves. Only 1 sack allowed in his 32 starts, 2-time first-team All-Pro. But when you go to the tape, it might be even more impressive than the track record through his first 2 years in the league. These guys can gain yards on basically any run play, have the ability to create lateral movement and open cutback lanes for the running backs on zone plays. But even more so, they can run all these gap schemes with linemen pulling and kicking out defenders. When they go power behind Quentin Nelson pulling up the hole, it's pretty much an automatic 4 yards at least, unless one of those backs stumbles along the way. Not only did the Colts finish just 5.8 yards short of outdoing the Titans, who had the league's leading rusher in terms of yards per game, but they also ended up being second in first downs gained via the run and first down percentage on those plays, behind only the Ravens, who obviously blew everybody out of the water in their historic season. For the Colts, you had Marlon Mack with another 1,000-yard season, despite missing a couple of games. And then Indy had 4 more players with at least 200 yards rushing on the season. In half of the games they played, they crossed 130 yards on the ground, and they had 3 weeks with 200-plus yards. Now with a true banger and home run hitter in Wisconsin, Jonathan Taylor, being added to the mix as a second-round pick, that rushing attack is going to go to the next level. Plus, they have a scat back in Nyheim Hines, who they can use in jet sweeps and little toss plays. Plus, then as a decoy of those, open up more room inside, especially if you fake those little sweeps to him. And even though the Colts were only tied for 9th in sacks allowed last season, there was only 1 quarterback in the league with more time to throw than Jacoby Brissett. when you look at the backup situations along the O-line, it might not be the best in the league, since Chaz Green was a guy who was picked on early in his career with Dallas, and then a 5th rounder this year in Danny Pinter, who I honestly didn't watch a lot of, but will certainly have a transition period going from Ball State to the NFL. However, the 6th man, so to speak, in LaRaven Clark is a guy I liked a whole lot since I evaluated him at Texas Tech. He's filled in very well when called upon, only allowing 4.5 sacks in 35 career games, which includes 12 starts. Right behind the Colts, I have the New Orleans Saints, and no matter which metrics you use or if you just go based on the tape, I don't think you can come to any conclusion other than the Saints have 2 of the top 10 offensive tackles in the league today. Ryan Ramczyk, in my opinion, has a good case for being the best one in the entire league, and then with Armstead, the only question with him is the ability to stay healthy these last few years. In 7 years as a pro, he's never played a full 16 games, and over the last 4 seasons, he's missed a combined 22 starts. But when both of these guys have been on the field, the results really speak for themselves. Ramczyk didn't allow a single sack last season, and he was named Pro Football Focus's Run Block of the Year, which only strengthens his case for being that best player at his position altogether right now. And then Armstead, he hasn't given up a sack over the 25 games since 2017, and he's been responsible for just 1.4 pressures per game over that stretch. At the center spot, you had a rookie in Eric McCoy stepping right in and actually being an upgrade over Max Unger, who was a multiple-time Pro Bowler for the Saints and the Seahawks. McCoy only allowed 14 pressures and earned PFF's highest grade among rookie offensive linemen. This offseason, the Saints also paid left guard Andrus Peat $57.5 million over 5 years, which was a pretty big contract for them, but they were expected to lose him in free agency, and then they spent another first-round pick on Michigan's Cesar Ruiz this year. I'm not quite sure why they let Larry Warford go, just because they drafted Ruiz, since for me, as high as I was on Ruiz coming out of Michigan, had him as my top-rated interior offensive lineman, this at best for this upcoming season is a parallel move when they are really in a win-now mode as Drew Brees probably enters his final year as a pro. Still, that starting 5 with 3 first-rounders, another top 50 pick in McCoy, and then Armstead maybe being the most talented of the bunch as a 3rd-round pick, it's highly impressive. And as high as I speak of this group, the Saints actually only averaged 4.3 yards per rush attempt last season. However, a lot of that had to do with a banged-up Alvin Kamara and the combination of fullback dives and the starting quarterbacks averaging just 0.7 yards per carry. That really pushes that number down further than it should have been. The 2 years before, they had finished in the top 6 in total rushing offense respectively. And in terms of sacks allowed, they finished 3rd in the league last season with 25 of those, and 6 of them came in one bad Falcons game where really the entire Saints team seemed to have fallen asleep at the wheel. What really stands out about this group and the Saints overall is the way that they can move the ball on their own terms. With that I mean, if they need to run the ball, they can run it. And if they need to drive the ball late, their quarterback usually stays clean. That tends to put them a step ahead of the competition, and with Sean Payton's ability to design plays, they're one of the 2 or 3 best screen teams in the entire league. Everybody on that unit can really get out in front, and they run those plays on 1st and 10 as well as 3rd and long, and are successful with it pretty much every single time. So with that being said, why do I not have them ahead of the Colts? The advanced stats for the Saints might actually be the best in the league, but they'll have a rookie in the starting lineup, and as high as I was on Ruiz, and still am, those numbers look a lot better thanks to that quick rhythm passing attack with a limited amount of deep shots due to having Drew Brees on the center. And when I look at the guys they have on the bench, I see a veteran in Nick Easton, who's a solid guard center option that was originally brought in to start for them last year, another former starter in James Hurst, who has played all along the front and had some pretty good stretches in Baltimore, and then former 7th round pick Will Clapp. He was an all-SEC selection at both guard and center. When he was asked to step in, he's not just been getting run over, and he's probably only going to be the 8th lineman if they even carry that many on game days. So definitely a strong 8 from top to bottom. At number 3, I have the Baltimore Ravens, and if you just go by the numbers, the Ravens have a great case for being number 1 on this list. This group led the way for the all-time record in rushing yards, which was basically 1,000 yards more than anybody else in the league last season, and they averaged half a yard more than the next closest squad. So it's not just the volume of rushing plays, but also how effective they were on those. They also only allowed 25 sacks on the season, which was tied for 3rd fewest, protecting the reigning league MVP Lamar Jackson. However, a lot of the accomplishments they had was thanks to the heroics of Lamar Jackson, some tough inside runners, and a creative system under offensive coordinator Greg Roman to keep defenses off balance. More importantly, why do I not have them even higher? They did lose a Hall of Fame guard in Marshall Yanda to retirement, and really both the starting guard spots to me are still somewhat up in the air, with competition still going on in whatever we'll have in terms of a training camp. With that being said, let's focus on the pieces they still have. Ronnie Stanley, to me, has emerged as the best left tackle in the game today. And for Baltimore, it all starts with the run game, where the 6'6", 320-pound tackle controls reps once he gets his hands inside the chest of defenders, and he basically never misses assignments. Even more impressive, he was PFF's pass blocker of the year with no sacks surrendered and 9 games without a single pressure allowed even. On the opposite side of the line, you have Orlando Brown. He fell in the 2018 draft because he had a horrendous combine performance, but after the first 6 weeks of the 2018 season, he hasn't given up the right tackle gig yet, mauling people at 6'8", and probably quite a few pounds above the 345 that he's listed at. Plus, to go along with that, he's only been responsible for 2 sacks and 3 flags so far. At center, you have Matt Skura coming back, who was placed on IR after 11 weeks last season, but up to that point he had been playing very well, just 1 sack allowed, flagged twice only. So, like I mentioned, the 2 guard spots to me are still up for grabs, but I really like the competition they have for them. You look at Bradley Bozeman, he was an above average starter for them last year at left guard, and I had a mid-day 2 grade on Ben Powers in the 2019 draft. This offseason, the Ravens also bring in DJ Fluker, who might have never lived up to his draft status as a top 10 pick, I think, but he's been a very solid player wherever he has been. And then in this year's draft, the Ravens selected Tyree Phillips from Mississippi State late in the 3rd round, and then Brandon Bredesen from Michigan in the 4th. With Bredesen in particular, I'll expect him to crack the starting lineup sometime down the road. Really like some of the things he offers. For the Ravens, as much heavy personnel as they use, and all the different option plays they run out of it, communication and assignment-proof blocking is crucial. And this group, they set it all up. When the team really needs it, they usually come through and drive the defense off the ball to gain those 2 or 3 yards for a new first down and keep drives going. Plus, when Lamar really needs time, they usually give him that as well. The team as a whole averaged a half yard more than the next closest team at 5.5 and 57 first downs more than any other team in the league. Not only do the averages in classical statistics look good, but according to Football Outsiders, they were also tied for the lowest percentage of run plays stuffed at 13%, and they were tied for 5th in sacks allowed with 28 of those, despite running so much deep play action and having a quarterback in Lamar who wants to extend plays. Of course, with Lamar shaking somebody in the backfield, that doesn't hurt either in that department. For Baltimore, having that 6th man in the box to account for, who is a true threat to get to the edge, and then that staple of running backs, especially now having added one of the premier backs in the draft in J.K. Dobbins from Ohio State, those guys give them a brute downhill force as the dive action, and Lamar, of course, that threat to the edge. And then you have another guy coming out with Lamar for a triple option. So much stuff to account for the defense, and even now with a full offseason to study it, Greg Roman's offense would once again be very tough to defend, especially if the MVP can take another step as a pocket passer. They're as tough to defend as any other team in the league, probably other than Kansas City, and in terms of the run game, it's a tough task to game plan for. Alright, at number 4, I have the Las Vegas Raiders, and they are a team whose offensive line I believe isn't talked about enough. It is really one of the more impressive groups in the entire league, and the team heavily relies on it. The one spot where I don't think they have above average players left tackle of Colton Miller, who I was heavily against as a mid-first round pick a couple of years ago, but he's shown at least some improvement in year 2, and is not a liability I would say, while obviously having the athletic skill set to continue to keep growing. But the rest of this unit, it's outstanding. People may not like Rich Incognito too much as a person, but in terms of his play on the field, there are only a few people I refer to more as ass kickers than him. He's one of the elite run blockers in the game, routinely driving guys off the ball, and he allowed only 1 sack in 12 starts last season. Then you have Rodney Hudson. To me, he's established himself as the 2nd best center in the league, behind only Jason Kelce from the Eagles. And statistically, he's by far the best altogether in pass protection. He's allowed only 1 combined sacks in 5 years in Oakland, and he finished with PFF's highest pass blocking grade for 5 consecutive seasons now at the position. Gabe Jackson has been another very underrated guard for a while now. Had a subpar 2019 season, especially in protection, but he's still one of the best run blockers out there, and I expect to get back to the 2018, 2017 form, whatever it may be. And then you have Trent Brown at right tackle, probably the most massive player in the entire league, 6'8", 380 pounds. He's a people mover on gap schemes, and he's more than held his own in pass protection. He's given up just 6 sacks over the last 3 seasons while playing with 3 different teams. So all these different systems where he had to get accustomed with, and different rules in protection or different tactical things they tell him, and he's been able to shut down pass rushers for the most part. This group can really set the tone up front to me. They can run inside and outside zones and poke their big frames in front of defenders. But when those guys really get going on power O or counter plays, that's when they truly can take it to the defense. Hudson's a guy who's also very effective on those little skip pulls leading up to the play side backer. And when you look at the total rushing yards and averages for the Raiders last season, they may not be super impressive, but they were forced to reshuffle constantly. They had the full starting 5 out there for just 6 games, and those guys missed a combined 21 starts, which doesn't even include the games the players got banged up originally in. So when I look at the advanced stats, they still finished 6th in adjusted rushing yards for the O-line, run stuff percentage, and sacks allowed respectively, according to Football Outsiders. If I had to tell them one thing, it would actually be running more off tackle towards the right side with big Trent Brown, where they average 1.2 yards more per attempt than running off the left side. I feel like the additions of Richie Incognito and then rookie Josh Jacobs at running backs coming out of Alabama last offseason, that rushing attack really took another step forward, but they had already been excellent protecting cars for years now. Take out 2018, where the 2 starting tackles alone were responsible for 27.5 sacks, and you had Colton Miller leading the league in those quarterback takedowns. This is where they have finished in sacks allowed since 2016. 2nd, 3rd, and then 6th last season. And they never reached the 30 mark in any of those 3 seasons. Especially last season with all that reshuffling, that's highly impressive to me. When I look at the guys they have on the bench now, as far as the O-line backups go, the 2 names may not be overly impressive, but the Raiders obviously saw enough talent in those guys to spend valuable mid-round picks on them. Brandon Parker in particular, very talented tackle prospect coming out of North Carolina A&T, was the 65th overall pick in 2018, had a pretty rough going when thrown out there on the field, but the athleticism and length are definitely there to continue to develop. And then this year in the 4th round, they grabbed John Simpson out of Clemson, who brings a lot of thump and initial contact in the run game and has a strong punch and protection to control those reps, but also had some issues with his balance and overall consistency. I remember watching at the Senior Bowl where on day 1 he got beat up quite a bit, but then the next game he came back, seemed kind of pissed and was very physical, had a couple of dominant reps in pass pro. But like I said, overall consistency, just the thing he needs to work on. And rounding out the top 5 is the Dallas Cowboys. And let me get this out of the way. These guys are not what we like to call the Great Wall of Dallas 2.0 a couple of years ago, when they were leading the way for the league's leading rusher in 3 of the 5 years since 2014. But this group still has a lot to like here. Let's look at some of the personnel changes they've made since then. First round, Leary left for the Broncos in free agency. Brought in La'el Collins initially, who was a great gain actually for them as a former undrafted free agent because of some of the accusations that were made around him, and then later it all cleared up that actually he wasn't involved in those. But then his agent told teams that he wouldn't play for them if he was drafted, so he waited that out and I think actually got the highest contract ever for an undrafted free agent and immediately became a starter for the Cowboys. A year later he was asked to move over to right tackle after Doug Freed retired, and then the left guard spot became kind of an issue in 2017, sharing snaps between Jonathan Cooper and Chaz Green. So they drafted Connor Williams out of Texas, who had a pretty rough rookie campaign actually, but I thought took a big step ahead in year 2 now, allowing just 1 sack and being much better at picking up D-line games up front, since he basically only played left tackle at Texas and wasn't used to as many inside stunts and twists. Those are some of the things that gave him issues early on, but I thought he got a lot better at that last season. Now coming into this year, the Cowboys face another challenge, trying to replace a perennial All-Pro in Travis Frederick at center. That's probably where last year's 3rd round pick Connor McGovern out of Penn State steps in. Joe Looney was solid for them when Frederick dealt with blood clot issues in 2018, but I think McGovern is the guy they wanted to invest in. With that being said, I think Dallas still has one of the best duos of offensive tackles in the league, outside of New Orleans of course, who I already talked about. And they have the only true challenger for the title as the top guard in the league to the Colts' Quentin Nelson, now that Brandon Brooks is also out for the year. Zach Martin, he has an unbelievable base to control pass rushes, and he can create a lot of vertical as well as horizontal push in the run game. Tyron Smith hasn't really been able to stay completely healthy these last couple of years, missing 3 games in each of the last 4 seasons, and even when he was out there, he was banged up quite a bit. Before that, I considered him one of the 2 truly elite left tackles in the game, together with Trent Williams from the division rival Redskins, who himself sat out all of last season. So for Smith, he's not quite held in such a high regard anymore, with some of the young guys coming up. But Collins, to me, he emerged as one of the better young tackles in the league as well, allowed just 3 sacks last season and was flagged just twice. And he really gained that recognition as being a bully when he gets on the move and can put hands on people in space. As far as McGovern goes, I really like the aggressiveness of a run blocker coming out of college and that ability to anchor down versus bull rushers, but at the same time he had a tendency of oversetting his man in protection and was a little late to pick up twists and stunts, which I already talked about with Connor Williams just a minute ago, some of the issues he had as a rookie. But putting him between Williams and Martin and running more half-line slides would help him out as well. As far as the Dallas run game, they run a lot of inside zone and some of those stretch plays from the gun with an RPO element on the backside for the quarterback to read. But then at the same time, they can get out in front on tosses and sweeps. For as much east and west as they run, the fact that they were tied for the league low in stuffed run percentage at 13% with Baltimore, that's pretty impressive actually. And then in the pass game, the only thing that they really have struggles with is picking up those delayed stunts and blitzes. But you look at it, they gave Dak a lot of time to work through his progressions, and they still finished tied for second lowest in the league with only 23 sacks allowed last season. In terms of the guys they have off the bench, you look at Looney, he has starting experience at both guard spots and then played a full season at center. That's a huge plus for them. Early on day 3 of this year's draft, they selected Wisconsin's Tyler Biadasz. That could be a huge payoff somewhere down the road because he was a multiple-time All-American and really only dropped because he hasn't been healthy for more than a year now. If he's back closer to his 2018 form, he's one of the best backups in the entire league. And then they also signed Cam Irving this offseason, formerly of the Chiefs. He has starting experience at every position along the front, and at least is a versatile piece they can carry on game days. So all in all, they're top 8 guys, depending on how much they actually want to maybe redshirt Biadasz. Those guys could be as good as anybody in the league. Alright, moving on to number 6, I have the Green Bay Packers. They're bringing back 4 or 5 starters from the O-line a year ago, but that one loss is a pretty big one. Brian Bulaga, still one of the better right tackles in the league, dealt with a lot of good edge rushers in that NFC North and allowed Aaron Rodgers to extend plays, as well as the Packers having the most success running off right tackle last season in the ground game. Had they known that Bulaga would actually sign for only $10 million a year with the Chargers, they would have probably brought him back. But outside of that, they still have a lot of continuity, and with the one switch they made, it could be a rather smooth one if things turn out right. This offseason they bring in Rick Wagner, who's kind of been a forgotten man these last few years, but once was the highest paid offensive tackle in Detroit back in 2017. He used to be one of the more promising young players at the position in Baltimore, but has shown a lot of issues transferring his weight, dealing with more well-schooled pass rushers who can convert speed to power, all those things. But the one plus with him, he's only missed 10 total games in his 7-year career, while Bulaga has only played 16 games twice since his rookie campaign. On the opposite end of the line, you could say David Bakhtiari was the best left tackle in the game for 2 years, until now the Ravens' Ronnie Stanley joined the conversation, and to me slightly moved ahead of him now. Still, he's an elite pass protector, allowing the fewest pressures among tackles from 2016 to 2018, and in last season you look at it from week 10 on all the way to the NFC Championship, no sacks allowed, only 14 pressures, a really strong stretch. A couple of years ago the Packers were forced to make a tough decision between their current starter Corey Linsley and now Brown starter JC Treader. The latter one has since been a tiny notch better, I would say, but either way both guys have played very well. Since 2017, Lindsay has held opponents to 6.5 sacks against him, and he's only been flagged 4 times over that stretch. 2 weeks into last season, then rookie Elton Jenkins took over at left guard, and he had an excellent debut campaign, was my 43rd overall prospect in the draft, and he immediately repaid the pack, didn't give up a single sack. And then the other guard, Billy Turner, was a free agency addition for them last season, ended up starting all 16 games and was a very solid contributor, with only 1 flag thrown against him. When I look at Green Bay, to me it all starts with protecting Aaron Rodgers. That all-time talent, he specializes at extending plays and creating big ones off those, which puts a lot of pressures on the guys up front to stay with their opponents and adjust on the fly. So taking out 2017, when Rodgers only played 7 games, he's finished in the top 6 in terms of time holding onto the ball every season, and he was one of only 9 quarterbacks to throw the ball slightly beyond the sticks last year, while the Packers finished only tied for 10th with 36 sacks allowed. Their average time to allow a pressure at 2.62 seconds was the highest number in the entire league. The biggest difference for this group last season was how effective they ran the ball. Aaron Jones became the first 1,000-yard rusher since Eddie Lacy back in 2014, and Aaron Jones was tied at the top of the list with Derrick Henry with 16 rushing touchdowns. According to Football Outsiders, they finished tied for 5th with the Raiders in adjusted line yards, and curiously kind of also tied for 6th with that team in stuffed run percentage at 17%. With Matt LaFleur coming in last year as the new head coach and a focus on the zone run game, the horizontal movement that these guys can create up front and either get the backs to the edge or open up cutback lanes all the way to the backside, it's really good. They'll probably shift to an even more run-heavy team now that they brought in a 250-pound banger in A.J. Dillon from Boston College, and then kind of an H-back, flex, tight end, whatever it may be, in Josiah DeGuara from Cincinnati. A lot of people are upset that the Packers didn't actually draft a wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers, and I'm in that camp. I think they had some chances to do so, but you look at the guys they brought in, they clearly want to shift the offense a little bit, take some pressure off Rodgers. When I look at the guys they have backing up on the O-line, Lane Taylor actually was the starting left guard last season and beat out Jenkins in training camp, but then suffered a season-ending bicep injury. This offseason he restructured his contract to be able to compete for the starting spot once again, since he probably would have been expendable otherwise. Green Bay spent a 5th rounder a couple of years ago on Cole Madison, coming out of Washington State from the pass-heavy system. And then this year they selected 3 offensive linemen in the 6th round. The one that sticks out to me most is Michigan's John Runyon Jr. To me, he's most likely to make that roster because of the position flexibility and the pedigree he presents. Next, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers, and similar to the Packers, Pittsburgh is actually bringing back 4 of the 5 starters from a year ago. For them, the challenge will be replacing left guard Ramon Foster, who had been a stalwart for them for pretty much a decade now until retiring this offseason. First in line for the starting job should be Stefan Wisniewski, kind of a journeyman in the NFL, started his career out in Oakland, and then played very well for the Eagles when called upon a couple of years ago during their Super Bowl run. But then Philadelphia declined his 2019 option, which left him on the market for a while. Kansas City decided to bring in him at the start of October once Martinez Rankin got hurt, and he ended up being a major contributor once he was inserted into the starting lineup from week 16 all the way through the Super Bowl in place of Andrew Wiley at left guard. Definitely played at the starter level and deserves that chance once again. The rest of the interior of Marquise Pouncey and David Castro has been stable for them since the latter was drafted in 2012. Pouncey, to me, actually kind of an overrated player, especially all-time when you look at all the Pro Bowls and All-Pro nominations he's gotten. And the analytics community would actually agree with me. He finished 34th in PFF's grading system when there's only 32 teams in the league. But with that being said, he gives them a certain toughness, and he doesn't just miss assignments very often. De Castro, to me, was in the elite guard conversation for a few years now, but like everybody else, he took a little step backwards in 2019, still one of the better zone blocking guards in the league, and hasn't allowed more than 2 sacks since his rookie campaign. Left tackle Alejandro Villanueva, another guy who had one great season, but has kind of regressed back to the norm, and is more of an average starter to me. Has some problems against power rushers, where his height gives him kind of a disadvantage. And then as far as right tackle goes with Matt Filer, took him a while to establish himself in the league as a former undrafted free agent, but has worked his way up to a respectable starter for sure. A little heavy-footed and therefore vulnerable to inside counters, but the total package is definitely solid. Miles Garrett has been kicking their asses these last 2 years, until he, of course, took that hitting parts to a point that nobody wanted to see. But let's get back to the Steelers and some of the things they want to do. They still run quite a bit of inside zone, like they were famous for with Le'Veon Bell dancing behind the line of scrimmage. But now with more downhill backs like James Conner and Benny Snell, they use a lot more power plays where they can get the guards on the move or kick out and leap blocks. Plus, than last season, they ran quite a few fly sweeps and used 2-back sets. You look at the statistical output, it's not very impressive. finished with the 4th fewest rushing yards, and were tied for the 4th fewest touchdowns at 7, and average yards per attempt at 3.7 respectively. But that backfield was a mess. You had James Conner, he was banged up for most of the year, and they were rotating guys in and out. Plus, opposing defenses could often put that +1 in the box with little threat of a passer out there. To show you how bad the quarterback play was for Pittsburgh last season, both Mason Rudolph and Devin Hodges finished around the league average in time to throw, and they were still tied for a league low 4.5 average yards per completion, and that led to the Jets being the only team to average less yards per play at 4.7. However, I think the offensive line did their job for the most part, finishing in the top 10 with 32 sacks allowed and earning the 3rd highest pass blocking grade as a unit by Pro Football Focus. The Steelers primarily lose half-line slides and protection, and they have been outstanding at transitioning twists and stunts. That'll definitely be a bit of an adjustment now without Foster for the first time in a long time, but with Newski, he's a very smart, heady player with starting experience across all 3 spots on the interior, so I expect this trend of being excellent at transitional D-line games to continue. I also think these guys for Pittsburgh are awesome on drawn plays, where they do a really good job of selling the pass, then opening up a lane for the back and working up to the 2nd level. At number 8, I have the Tennessee Titans, and for these guys, it all starts with their play up front and that 250-pound monster in Derrick Henry running behind those guys. That, combined with some big plays by Ryan Tannehill sprinkled in, is the formula that led them all the way to an AFC title game appearance. And before we get into anything else, the reason this group isn't even a couple spots higher is due to the fact they lost right tackle Jack Conklin for agency, who has been one of the more consistent players at the position since his rookie campaign in 2016, when he was immediately named the first-team All-Pro. With that being said, Tennessee did make sure to continue the trend of having 2 former first-rounders at both tackle spots, now with Isaiah Wilson coming out of Georgia. For the 6'7", 350-pound behemoth, I had him quite a bit lower on my draft board because I thought he played a little top-heavy, and I saw enough agility issues on tape that would make me question his ability to stay out on the edge. But like I mentioned in my mock draft, when I actually had them going 1 spot before that to Seattle, I thought he would fit best in a system where you want to build on the run and then play action off those to avoid many true drop-back pass sets, which is exactly what the Titans want to do. So he's a very good fit in Tennessee. On the opposite end of the line, you have Taylor Lewan, who has kind of been on the fringe of making the jump into the league conversation for a few years now, and he's only allowed 2.5 sacks in the 27 starts he's had over his last 2 seasons, while consistently widening the edge with his drive in the run game. Left guard Roger Saffold was a huge addition for them last offseason, and we saw the impact his loss with the Rams had. You look at Ben Jones, together with division rival Brandon Linder from the Jaguars. Those 2 guys are probably the 2 most underrated centers in the game, but both do a lot of things to make the ground game work for these 2 teams. And finally at right guard is where Nate Davis jumped in week 4 of his rookie campaign last season, especially in protection with 5 false starts committed. But I loved his ability to create movement on angle blocks with that great pad level and the balance he displayed in his lower body coming out of Charlotte. The Titans run a lot of zone, not only because it fits the alignment that they have brought in, but more importantly it fits what Derrick Henry wants to do. His running style and the way he can get things going is by building up momentum, and the few times opponents can actually get him to the ground is when he has to stop his feet in the backfield and change directions. For a 250-pound monster like him, his speed to the edge is actually unbelievable, and when the linebackers start flowing too hard, it creates huge cutback lanes. Quick toss plays create similar issues for the defense, where Henry can bend inside on those runs and take advantage of lanes there. The Titans do a lot of different things with their tight ends, putting them in the backfield, motioning them around, and securing the backside edge with sift or hinge blocks or whatever it may be. And then off those run fakes, they use a lot of heavy play action with Ryan Tannehill turning his head around and then firing deep posts or over routes on those simple high-low reads on deep middle safeties, while the big guys keep the paws glued to the chest of defenders. When you look at the amount of sacks allowed for Tennessee, it's really not good. They finished with the 3rd most at 50 sacks, and you should not overlook that number for sure. But 29 of them came through the first 6 weeks of the season when Marcus Mariota was still in the center, who to me still is a one-read quarterback with little pocket awareness, a lot of unnecessary scrambling and getting caught in the process, plus the amount of deep shots and long developing plays that the Titans use definitely doesn't help with that sack number. That is indicated by the third highest number of air yards and average yards beyond the sticks for Tannehill. So with all that, I'm just trying to say that sacks don't tell the whole story, since the Rams, like I mentioned earlier, allowed the least amount of sacks, and I would have probably put them as a bottom 5 unit last season. At the same time, finishing first in yards after contact definitely helps their rushing output as well. For Tennessee, bringing in Dennis Kelly as a quality swing tackle is a big help, but like I mentioned previously in my biggest remaining need segment, their interior O-line lacks a little bit of depth, and that's I think where they could still improve upon as well. At number 9, I have the Philadelphia Eagles, and first and foremost, if they still have Brandon Brooks coming into 2020, they would have definitely been in my top 3, and I had them up there until news broke. Brooks, one of the truly elite guards in football, and losing him to a torn Achilles, it really sucks. So for the Eagles to go basically from an all-pro to an unproven backup, that's a big difference. And that's why they dropped that far. Still, there's enough on this front to get excited about in my opinion. The two studs on these units that are still there are Jason Kelce and right tackle Lane Johnson. Kelce to me has been the best player at his position for like 3 or 4 years at least now, because of the way he opens up the run game with his mobility and agility, to go with how in sync he was with his guards in terms of passing on assignment and protection. He has been an extremely valuable player for Philadelphia. And then Johnson at right tackle, he's been fighting some nicks and bruises these last 3 years, missing 6 games over that stretch and having to toughen out some of those injuries, which didn't allow him to play quite up to his standards last season. But with that in mind, he still only gave up 1 sack in 12 starts and was graded as the top run blocking offensive tackle by Pro Football Focus. You look at the left tackle spot, there will also be a change from a long-time stalwart and 9-time Pro Bowler in Jason Peters over to a guy who they traded up for in last year's draft in the first round with Andre Dillard from Washington State. There were some major issues when he was thrown out there last season, gave up 6 sacks on only 336 total snaps, but evaluating him coming out of college, he has natural tackle feet, that ability to mirror, it really stood out to me as a prospect, and if he just hit the weight room to create some more movement and initial contact in the run game, he could be a long-term quality starter for them. At left guard, they just extended Isaac Somalo last offseason, and he repaid them with a really good 2019 campaign, starting all 16 games and being responsible for just 3 sacks and holding calls respectively. However, that second guard spot is now really where those questions arise. Isolated him at Pryor for now, just because he's the only player on that remaining roster with any regular season experience to speak of, and that's only 79 snaps in 2019. He's far from a proven commodity. Philadelphia also still has Jordan Mailata, a former rugby league standout who hadn't even played football until 2018, but he's looked pretty good in preseason so far, even though he's never taken a single snap of regular season action. And after those 6 guys, I went with 2 rookies from this year's draft over Nate Herbig, who was a UDFA addition for them last year and only played 3 snaps all season. GM Howie Roseman selected the 2 Auburn tackles, Jack Driscoll and Prince Tega in the 4th and 6th round respectively. Driscoll was a highly consistent player in his 2 years in the SEC after transferring from UMass, allowing just 1 sack and 2 hits over that stretch. But he's undersized and not very long, which I thought could be issues for him at the next level, and there are already some whispers about him moving inside potentially. And then for Prince, I had a 3rd round grade on him, since he isn't very flashy with tremendous footwork or pure power, but I really like the way he rolls his hips into contact to go with the length and ability to anchor he presents as a pass protector. He fell that far in the draft because of some health concerns, which I'm not totally sure about. But whoever earns that starting gig at right guard for them will have the luxury of playing between 2 all-pro level players. What Kelce does in terms of scooping out the tackles from combo blocks to allow his guards to climb to the 2nd level, or just give them simple down blocks since he's used heavily as a puller himself, it's some special stuff. I expect the Eagles to run a lot of duo, where Miles Sanders' patience to set up things should put his lineman in good position, and then hit you with some outside zone or quick toss play to show off that burst to the edge. These guys will definitely have a lot to prove with 2 new starters, but they could still be very good despite that. And then to close out things, at number 10, I have the Cleveland Browns, and it's kind of crazy to have them up here, since they were looked at as one of the bigger liabilities in the league last season. But with the additions they have made this offseason, I think they'll turn themselves into a big strength in 2020. And let's just get right into that, because they added 2 bookends in former Titan Jack Conklin, who they actually signed to a very reasonable deal, and then my number 1 rated tackle, Chadwick Wills from Alabama, being the 10th overall draft pick. Those are huge upgrades over Greg Robinson and Chris Hubbard, who gave up almost double-digit sacks and were called for holding 9 times combined. The Browns were also forced to play Eric Kush and Justin McCray over 30% of the snaps respectively, and those two were atrocious when put out on the field. Conklin to me is one of the more consistent players at his position, allowing 3 sacks last season and driving defenders off the ball routinely in the run game. And then Wills, he was a top 5 prospect for me in this year's draft, because while he might not be as freakishly athletic as the 2 guys who were drafted behind him, in Mekhi Becton and Tristan Wirfs, he's so smooth and technically sound already with his footwork, the way he reads rushers, and then he has a mean streak in the run game to get after people. So adding those two to what I believe is already a really good interior group. Joel Bitonio might not quite be that elite guard, but he's right in the next tier for me. He's only allowed 2.5 sacks over these last 2 years and was a second team All-Pro in both of them. JC Tretter to me took a slight step backwards last season, but is still an above average starter. And those two together create a lot of movement on combo blocks, constantly forcing the Mike backer to overrun the play, which leads to several occasions where Nick Chubb just takes that inside lane up the backside A-gap. And I was also a big fan of Wyatt Teller coming out of Virginia Tech a couple of years ago, because of the aggressiveness he displayed in the run game. His hand placement and ability to stay in front of rushers in one-on-one situations certainly still needs some work, but there's definitely upside as well. For the Browns, now that Kevin Stefanski comes in as the new head coach, and then they signed former Falcon Austin Hooper, I definitely believe they will run a lot more 12 personnel, which is where they had the most success out of last season already with lesser tight ends, and that offensive system will revolve around the outside zone game. Of that they want to call those bootlegs, and probably a Fodell on a backside post as a big play option if the defense decides to overcommit. Quarterback Baker Mayfield is at his best on the move and taking those big shots off play action. The Browns were already tied for the 4th highest average yards per rush at 4.8 last season, but they finished 22nd in rushing attempts simply because they found themselves trailing too much last season, which was in large part due to 28 total giveaways, which was 7th most in the league as well. But when Cleveland got the ground game going early and could keep their foot on the pedal, they were a tough out. Just go back and watch Nick Chubb go off for 165 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns against Baltimore in the first matchup, or then him and Kareem Hunt controlling the Buffalo game with just under 200 yards together. Cleveland actually finished with over 100 rushing yards in 11 of 16 games, and they only won one of those games where they didn't reach that milestone. Of course, a lot of the rushing success also had a lot to do with the running backs, which finished second only behind the Ravens in terms of rushing yards responsible for, but I just think the O-line should be so much better in 2020. With Wills and Conklin as bookends, those backs should be able to get around the corner at a much higher rate. They finished dead last and 6th lowest in yards on outside runs to either side respectively last season. I mean, those guys they had out there, they were asked to just seal the backside at times, and the edge defender gave a little head fake and then easily got the inside path, ruining those run plays. And they collapsed in protection on several occasions as well. But with that being said, the second pressure numbers were a lot higher than they should have been, because Baker just decided to roll to either side instead of just operating from within the pocket. That is something that Baker, I think, can definitely improve upon and will not have to do as much with less true drop-back pass plays. So for the Browns, they basically demoted starting tackle and Chris Hubbard to a backup role, which I believe is where he should be. And then I'm also a huge fan of the 5th round pick Nick Harris from Washington. Super agile mobile center who fits perfectly in the Browns' outside zone-based system, and he just needs to add some core strength for an NFL workout program before he's really ready to contribute. And I could potentially see him replace JC Tretter as the starting center a year from now if they want to get out of that contract down the road. 3 honorable mentions here. First, the San Francisco 49ers. With the addition of Trent Williams to go along with Mike McGlinchey, they have one of the better tackle duos in the league as well. A very strong run blocking interior. However, these guys are protected a little bit by that offensive system under Kyle Shanahan. Not a lot of pressure on them to just hold up their blocks for 5 seconds or something in protection and create those big plays, but rather run the ball, bootlegs off those, screen plays. Didn't quite make the cut, but definitely got the job done last season. Then you have the New England Patriots. Similar to the 49ers, their true strength is that duo of guards with Joe Thuney and Jack Mason. You have David Andrews returning at center, and then they expect Isaiah Wynn to finally stay healthy at left tackle. Not having Dante Scarnecchia as their O-line coach will definitely hurt them, but they'll be relied on heavily to run the ball with unproven quarterback play potentially. And then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. When you look at the left side with center Ryan Jensen, left guard Ellie Marpet, and tackle Donovan Smith, a very strong three. Now they draft Tristan Wirfs out of Iowa, freakish athlete, could play either guard or tackle. A lot of pressure on them last season with those deep shots in the pass game. Maybe a little of that taken off them with Tom Brady coming in and implementing a more quick rhythm passing attack to go along with that vertical offense. So I'll be interested to watch those guys. But that is it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you want to hear more of these breakdowns, subscribe to my YouTube channel, check out my page, HuddlesForFootballTalk.com, and follow me on my social media, which is linked down below. And just share this with one friend today. That would already help out a lot. I will be back next week with a list of NFL players who are kind of in a make or break season in 2020. Stay tuned for that and more. So until then, see you later. Peace.